My name is Erin Moxon. I'm a project manager at the District of North Vancouver in the engineering department. Now, I've worked at the district for about 4.5 years now, having spent nearly 20 years at the BC Ministry of Transportation. I'm a resident of Deep Cove, having lived here for about 8 years, and I spent 4 years previous to that living up Indian Arm on one of the fire lanes. I have 2 young daughters that are 5 and 8 years old, so I'm very often in the Cove. So in August of last year, the District of North Vancouver installed temporary water-filled barriers to pilot a pedestrian area on Lower Gallant to provide more space for gathering safely during the COVID-19 pandemic. This created space for public seating and for queuing. Following positive feedback that we received from the community about the pedestrian pilot via an online survey we did last fall, in January of this year, the district applied for government funding to improve the outdoor space on Lower Gallant and help create a more livable Deep Cove. You may have heard on the news that we recently received grant funding and it was approved on June 11th. We're reaching out again to the community so you can help us decide how best to use those funds. So what is Livable Deep Cove? Livable Deep Cove proposes to create a protected, shared space on Lower Gallant, offering open, flexible public space with one-way westbound vehicle access. The space focuses on pedestrians and pedestrian safety while still allowing for slow-moving westbound vehicles. The space is flexible so we can tailor the use of the space to the community's needs. Now we need to clarify a couple of terms that I'll be using throughout the presentation, and the two terms are Upper Gallant and Lower Gallant. Gallant Avenue spans 2 blocks of the village core. Upper Gallant refers to the westerly block that's higher up and furthest from the water, and it's circled in orange here. We have Cafe Orso, Blue House, Zucker's, the pharmacy, doctor, dentist are all on Upper Gallant. Lower Gallant refers to the easterly block that is lower down, closest to the water, where the remainder of the businesses are located. It's circled in light blue here. Lower Gallant runs between the 4-way stop at Gallant and Panorama down to the cul-de-sac near the viewpoint. Lower Gallant is also where the the water-filled orange barriers are currently installed. It's also important to clarify that the draft concepts that we'll be showing you tonight assume that traffic patterns in the village core remain the same as they are now, with all traffic entering and exiting the village on Upper Gallant and through the 4-way stop. All concepts also allow for one-way westbound traffic on Lower Gallant past the pedestrian area. Discussions around the possibility of different traffic patterns in the village core will take place later this summer and into the fall when we decide with community input how the Naughton Detour will be used once the storm sewer replacement construction work on Upper Gallant is done. So let's look at the 3 concepts that we've got. So staff and consultants have developed 3 draft design concepts that range from full-scale street redesign down to minimal improvements, and with features such as protected pedestrian spaces for outdoor seating, wider, even sidewalks, and planting pockets. These draft concepts offer creative use of space and street furniture, which can be adapted to suit different community needs throughout the year. So for example, we could have increased seating in the summertime and more parking in the winter. We have a unique opportunity to shape our community's future. These are only concepts that we're showing you, so we need to hear from you, the community, to understand how you'd like Lower Gallant to look and what your priorities are for the space. So let's look at the first draft design concept. This view is looking down and across to the south side of the street as if you were floating above Deep Cove Cultural Center. This shows the full renewal concept with new sidewalks, street pavers from storefront to storefront, new street trees, new lighting, new landscaping, including rain gardens and planting pockets at various points throughout the block, and stormwater management features. It would create a new look for the area. Westbound only traffic continues to be accommodated. What we call flex spaces would be created on either side of Lower Gallant, where we could convert the space into protected pedestrian seating or parking as needed. Continuous level pavers throughout would create a universally accessible area with no curbs, no steps, that prioritizes pedestrians while also permitting slow-moving westbound vehicles. Here's another view looking down Gallant from the four-way stop towards the water. In this rendering, we're showing heavy movable benches that, depending on where they're placed, could create a protected pedestrian space, or they could be moved to the side to allow for parking. At an estimated cost of $3.55 million, grant funding would cover just over 90% of the project cost, with the balance of funding coming from the district's capital budget. Construction would begin early this fall and would take at least 4 months, with disruptions such as excavation for concrete removal, asphalt removal, and placement of new surface materials, as well as other infrastructure. Here's one last view looking east towards the water on the south sidewalk. More space could be created so it wouldn't feel so tight or congested on the sidewalk. The draft design concept, the second draft design concept is a modest renewal that could create year-round accessible public seating areas on one or both sides of Lower Gallant. Pavers would be placed on top of the existing road asphalt to make a new seating area that would be level with the existing sidewalk. Raised planters could be installed at either ends of the block to add greenery and color. Lower Gallant would operate as a westbound only street with parking pockets on either side. It would create a new feel from curb to curb. Again, this is looking down Gallant from the four-way stop towards the ocean. At a moderate cost of $200,000 to $400,000, this concept would require minimal construction and would easily allow for future changes because the existing road surface underneath would remain intact underneath those pavers. Construction would begin early this fall and take about 2 to 3 weeks, and there'd be modest construction-related disruption. Here's a quick look down the sidewalk, down the south sidewalk towards the water. This concept retains the existing trees, so the sidewalk area would still feel a little tight in places. All right, so draft design concept number 3 proposes the most minimal improvements and most resembles the current temporary pedestrian zone. The orange barriers would be removed and replaced with removable bollards that would allow for flexible use of the space. When in place, those bollards would create a protected pedestrian space for seating, much like we have today. And when removed, they would make room for parking. With the bollards in place, Lower Gallant would operate as a westbound only street as it does now, with parking on the north side. Removing the bollards would open Lower Gallant to two-way traffic with parking on both sides, much like it was pre-COVID. This option could be implemented seasonally, for example, with bollards in place during the summer, when there's more pedestrians, and then removed in the winter. This low-cost status quo design concept would likely cost under $100,000. There would be no other changes to the road surface except for the installation of the removable bollards. Installation would likely take place at sometime during fall of this year and take only about 1 to 2 weeks to complete with minimal disruptions. This is one last view looking towards the water. The existing sidewalk, street trees, curb and gutter all remain the same, so that the sidewalk would continue to feel a little bit narrow as it does now. Okay, so there's a series of photos that will follow, and these are what we call precedent images. Precedent images are meant to show you real-life examples of specific design elements that have been installed elsewhere. They're not meant to show you what Deep Cove might look like as a whole, but show you examples of similar techniques that we're proposing for Lower Gallant and that have been used elsewhere in the region. The design elements being proposed aren't new. In fact, we have many examples right here in the district. We have to find the right mix and match of these elements to retain the small village feel that's so important to our community. So in this photo here, which is from Lynn Valley, I'd like to focus on the level pavers throughout. You can see that there's no steps, no curbs, which is inviting for pedestrians to roam freely and signals to vehicles that they need to slow right down. It also shows how bollards can be placed to protect pedestrian space. These level pavers are more in line with what we're suggesting for the full renewal option. This slide shows how a pedestrian prioritized street actually works, with pedestrians moving freely about and buses and other vehicles mixed in but moving at very slow speeds. This is a slide from Marine Drive in the district and shows wide, even sidewalks that provide more room for comfortably walking past storefronts. This example also aligns best with the full renewal option. And for those of you who may have a hard time visualizing what pavers might look like on Lower Gallant, you just need to head down to the cul-de-sac at the bottom of Gallant, where we've already got an example. So what you could do is you could get yourself down to the cul-de-sac and try to picture what those pavers might look like if they were extended all the way up to the four-way stop at Panorama. This is a quick photo that shows what a permanent planting pocket looks like, which provides space for ornamental plants or native species that's built into the ground so that it's at road level instead of planters that would be above ground. This type of planting pocket would be included in the full renewal option. This is a photo from Kamloops. Kamloops installed a number of these quasi-permanent paver-laid areas to expand their sidewalks in response to COVID last summer. Our modest improvement concept number 2 is based on this Kamloops example. In our case, we wouldn't need concrete barriers along the street and would instead have short concrete curbs that would contain the pavers. This image shows temporary above ground planters that could be installed as part of the modest improvement concept number 2. Seating could also be incorporated like is shown in this image. And here we are back on Lower Gallant, looking towards the water on the south side. For the minimal improvement concept number 3, we'd simply remove the orange barriers and replace them with removable bollards so that the seating could remain if needed. Or the bollards could be removed and the roadway reverted back to the pre-COVID configuration with two-way traffic and parking on both sides. It's interesting to look at this photo because you can see how narrow the existing sidewalk is between the permanent patios and the street trees. There's not a lot of space to move about freely. All right, so public consultation for Livable Deep Cove is live and happening now through an online survey that we have. We want to hear from you. We invite you to take the survey, review the 3 draft design concepts. All the renderings that we showed you tonight are also part of the survey, and provide us your feedback on what you think about them. Feedback will be pulled together and presented to council, who will ultimately decide how the grant funding will be used for Lower Gallant. You're absolutely welcome to reach out to me anytime by email or phone if you have any questions about the project that might not be addressed tonight.